and gentlemen, without further ado, here is Lee Fang. He's the investigative report. He's an investigative reporter with The Intercept. He used to work for Think Progress. He was a reporting fellow at the Nation Institute and a contributing writer at The Nation. And he was also a writer for the progressive outlet, The Republic Report. Right?
Yeah, helped found that website.
What?
Republic Report.
Oh, The Republic Report. Okay, yeah. I'm always. I'm more interested in. The Republic Report is interesting as well, but I want to know about your time at Think Progress. We can maybe get into that a little bit if you don't mind. Considering that they are, if I'm not mistaken, they are supposed to be like. They're out of business now, right?
Yeah, Nira killed them last year.
Yeah, Nira killed them. But even before, I think wasn't Judd like working with the DNC side by side and like literally got. He was mentioned
the spirit of justice.
like in the email leaks from WikiLeaks.
The devil.
Will anyone MODS?
Yeah, the former editor of Think Progress, Judd Legume. He formerly was the research director of Hillary Clinton 2008 against Obama. Rejoined CAP later on, and eventually took over as editor-in-chief. But Think Progress has existed before it was killed last year for a very long time. I think since 2005, and it's gone through many iterations. A lot of folks don't know this, but David Sirota used to work there. A lot of left-wing voices. I obviously used to work there, and its ideology changed radically over the years. It was much more insurgent, much more populist, much more critical of the business community and of lobbying back in the day. And later it became much more establishment friendly. And even under that more establishment friendly leadership, they were eventually squelched.
Yeah, it'd be like that sometimes. Well, anyway, I'm a big fan of your reporting. I think you're brilliant. I think you're awesome. So I'm glad that you came on today. And I wanted to specifically talk to you about something that you mentioned to Jeremy Scahill on the Intercepted podcast recently about Bloomberg's dark money operation. Well, not just dark money operation, but Bloomberg's network of influence that he's created over years by funding a lot of these philanthropies to the tune of I believe it was $500 or was it $700 million a year that he spends exclusively on buying access and influence, and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, we've just never seen anything like it. I cover a lot of issues in politics, I guess, but I have a focus on money and politics, and there's really no comparison to what Bloomberg has done and what he's doing right now. You can look at lots of different special interest groups, the oil industry, big tobacco, in terms of creating hundreds of different political organizations, think tanks, campaign contributions, creating a whole effort to control our public policy and political process. And there are, lots of examples of really extreme incidents of this in recent U.S. history, but nothing compares to what Bloomberg's done. I went on Intercepted and I've been on a few other programs talking about Bloomberg. And, I mentioned this $700 million, $1 billion that Bloomberg spends on philanthropy and political giving every year. And I was actually giving out the wrong figure, because as of just about a week or two ago, the New York Times revealed with some new reporting and new documents that as Bloomberg was getting ready to run for president last year, he gave away $3 billion. That's just in 2019 alone. It's hard to wrap your mind around that. That's like a whole presidential cycle and all the different political races in the whole country combined just to give away money to get ready to run before he actually started running. What he's done is created a network of philanthropic groups, of super PACs, of direct contributions. He's training mayors. He has this academy where if you're a mayor, you can learn to become a better mayor, I suppose, and then apply for grants for your city. So not only will Bloomberg train your chief executive of your city, but that mayor will then fund programs in his or her city with Bloomberg money. So if they want an art program or a light rail program or whatever, a clean energy program, they can ask Bloomberg for money. And then when they want to challenge the industry, they want to pass gun reforms or clean energy reforms or get rid of juuling or whatever, they can then ask Bloomberg to fund their own local campaigns. So, in San Francisco, we had this effort to ban vaping, and our mayor, London Breed, not only attended the Bloomberg seminar, but then got millions of dollars in Bloomberg money to pass this ban on vaping. So and this is just in San Francisco. This has happened dozens of times, scores of times in cities all around the country. Lots of the new members of Congress in the wave of 2018 were elected with Bloomberg money. It's hard to find anyone that doesn't have a Bloomberg money connection. Even, I used to work at the Center for American Progress, as we were just talking about, the sponsor of Think Progress, and they were reliant on Bloomberg money. So it's really just connected to everything.
And I think that's a pretty good way to, I think that's a pretty good segue into talking about exactly what kind of impact this level of funding has on
your father, the devil.
Sometimes offering favorable coverage to Michael Bloomberg, and in other times silencing unfavorable coverage altogether. Center for American Progress very famously was slated to put out a report on the spying and the revocation of civil liberties from Muslim Americans, and a chapter was entirely dedicated to Michael Bloomberg's Muslim spying program by the NYPD, where he was spying on Muslim students going into masjids, even in places like New Brunswick, and where I went to school, and that was that part of that chapter of the report that mentioned Michael Bloomberg by name multiple times was completely taken off. And then lo and behold, we found out that Michael Bloomberg had given Center for American Progress $1.6 million and was slated to give them more down the line.
Yeah, I'm personally connected to this too in a way, because I wrote that first Islamophobia report along with some of my colleagues back in 2011, and that was very well received. That report was cited all over the world, and then 4 years later, CAP wanted to redo it, do that same report 2.0, and there was an entire chapter, as you mentioned, that wanted to dive into Bloomberg's massive Muslim spying effort, which had cops infiltrating mosques, community groups, even sending spies in whitewater rafting trips for Muslim student associations. Really kind of draconian tactics, and because of this is the kind of, I think, the insidious role of this money is that they didn't say anything publicly, but they just simply deleted that chapter because they were soliciting and receiving lots of Bloomberg money. And I think this is actually the way a lot of big money works in American politics. It's not just Bloomberg. If you look at the civil rights establishment, the NAACP, the Asian American civil rights groups, they won't come out for Medicare for all. They won't fight for a tax on the wealthy or on corporations. They just kind of zip their lips, because where do most of these liberal establishments get their money? It's from wealthy donors and major corporations. It's not like they pay these groups to go out and say evil things. It's to sit on the sidelines and sit on their hands. And I think this Bloomberg case is another example of this. Where you didn't see Cap saying Bloomberg's the best mayor in the world and he should run for president. It's more like, let's just be quiet about his really negative history here.
Yeah, and let's continue to launch attacks against all of his opponents. Well, not all of his opponents, but definitely his opponents that created a conflict for us and the established power that we've created for ourselves, specifically Bernie Sanders, of course. And one of the examples that you were mentioning is paying off or buying people's silence, or causing them to look the other way. Stacey Abrams, who also now works for the Center for American Progress, who is sitting on their board, right? Made waves last year in the gubernatorial race, where she came close to becoming the next governor of Georgia. And Stacey Abrams has literally gone on, not directly endorsed Michael Bloomberg, but has defended Michael Bloomberg on The View about the stop and frisk policies, and has even campaigned alongside Michael Bloomberg, I believe, all the way back in January. So, and that seems kind of remarkable when you think about it, because Stacey Abrams was supposed to be this shining beacon of hope in the Democratic Party, or at least that's what she was proposed as, and she was marketed as, and now she is whitewashing the really racist legacy of Michael Bloomberg, and even partaking in lightly endorsing him, I guess, by appearing alongside of him. Well, it turns out she got what, $5 million for her charity, her organization that she had started by Michael Bloomberg. So that's probably one way, and also direct contributions as well. It's also one way to get that sort of endorsement.
Yeah, look, I mean, this isn't new for Stacey Abrams. She was, before she ran for governor in Georgia in 2018, she was the House Minority Leader there. Very pro-business. She helped repeal. Georgia's actually very progressive, free tuition program. Helped roll that back, so it's inaccessible for many students now. She didn't support a $15 minimum wage. She helped the Republicans repeal or to pass a liability law that makes it almost impossible to prosecute the big banks. And Georgia was ground zero for the mortgage crisis, for the predatory lending crisis. She was very close to the big business community in Georgia. If you look at her campaign finance filings over the years, she's funded by big business. Even the Koch brothers have funded her. So I know she's the liberal darling right now. The DNC loves her. Cap loves her. The media really loves her. But this isn't new that she kind of cozies up with big business and forgets a lot of her progressive values. But look, bigger picture here, it's not about Stacey Abrams. Bloomberg's giving away hundreds of millions of dollars, and he's buying, either silence or endorsements all across the board. She's just one tiny cog in this. And this is not just what he's doing in the presidential race. This is how he ran for mayor. When he ran for mayor in 2001 in New York, he pushed cash to right-wing groups, Staten Island Republican groups that were engaging in really inflammatory racial election messaging, as well as to liberal groups in Harlem and Brooklyn. He kind of played both sides, getting kind of the far right and far left on his side just by simply spreading his money around.
That's hedging your bets, right? I mean, that's a classic finance tactic as well. I mean, and in gambling. So it's not surprising at all to fund literally both sides of the political spectrum to make sure that neither side attacks you ever.
Yeah, and Bloomberg, to his credit, I think is pretty open and honest about a lot of his beliefs. I mean, he's changed his tune just in the last few weeks to, appeal to the Democratic base. But, he's kind of openly cut checks and bought silence and said what he believes. He's a conservative Republican when it comes to spending, and a kind of a liberal when it comes to social issues. That's who he is, and how he gets his political agenda advanced is spreading his money around, cutting checks, and he's got a media company that can help advance his agenda and his image. Not only that, when he was there's a great article. If you want to really understand the Bloomberg method, the late Wayne Barrett, one of the greatest journalists we've had in the modern era, passed away a few years ago. He's written extensively about Michael Bloomberg. He wrote a long piece in the Village Voice about how Bloomberg changed the law in New York just to run for a third term.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible. I mean, just paying off pastors, paying off folks to just be quiet or endorse him, cutting special union contracts to get the unions to endorse this effort to run for a third term, putting Ed Koch, the former New York mayor, giving him a radio show that no one listened to on Bloomberg News. It was just incredible how much money he could pump into the system to literally change the law to run for a third term. And I think that speaks to what he's doing now, even though the tactics are a little bit different. The essential kind of philosophy there is the same.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is terrifying, but I guess maybe in a way there is the one weird bright side of this, is that it's really a mask off moment for a lot of people who were maybe teetering along the edges of getting more radicalized, or actually seeing how corrupt this machine is. Like seeing a billionaire directly buy his way into the presidential race, and then seeing the uncritical support that he's getting, regardless of how similar he is to Donald Trump in both material ways and in also immaterial ways, from like the identity politics perspective, or from the point of view that like liberals claim to care about on in these media outlets like the way he has treated women in his businesses, and the many lawsuits launched against them, or the obviously the material ways in which he has impacted the African American community in New York as he was the mayor. Like, these are all things that liberals claim to care about, and yet when Michael Bloomberg does it, it's somehow supposedly okay. And it's not just the mainstream media that's going out to bat for him. It's literally politicians like Gregory Meeks, who's gotten thousands of dollars in his reelection campaign directly from Michael Bloomberg. Gregory Meeks was on television a couple months back, openly stating his disdain for Bernie Sanders, who he called not a Democrat. He's like, Bernie Sanders is running, but he's not a Democrat. Well, what is Michael Bloomberg? Michael Bloomberg literally is not a Democrat. He has never even advocated for really democratic positions. He has funded both sides of the political spectrum, as you mentioned already. So, I mean, it's really corrupt, and I guess it's opening up some eyes, maybe. What do you think? Are you hopeful about that?
Well, look, I mean, just in terms of the mask off moment, this is kind of entertaining to watch. This is clarifying. This is in a way, a positive, and just in the sense that a lot of our politics are so murky. People use symbols and slogans, and as you mentioned, identity politics to kind of shroud what's actually going on in terms of who actually holds power and what are our actual policies and what direction is our country going in. I mean, there's a lot of emotional triggers in political rhetoric in the political groups that get involved, and it's very kind of hard to sort it out for viewers or for folks. And with Bloomberg running, it becomes crystal clear that a lot of folks that claim to have certain values or principles are actually motivated by seeking money and power. So it is a mask off moment. I mean, it's incredible. You watch Fox News or whatever talk radio, and you see them attacking San Francisco as this far left bastion, attacking our mayor as this radical leftist. And for folks who live in San Francisco and report and follow the news here, we know that San Francisco is actually controlled by a big business cabal.
Oh yeah,
it's not a radical left city, and the mayor here helped lead a big business backed push to defeat a corporate tax that would have raised billions of dollars over 10 years to build tons of new housing and solve this homelessness crisis that we're having. And she sided with big business to kill this tax, and we have this homelessness crisis. So is it any surprise that our mayor here just suddenly comes out and endorses Bloomberg? I mean, for folks who actually follow the power politics and the money, it's no surprise. But for folks that have this caricature of San Francisco political leadership as far left, well, I mean, their bubble is burst, because that's clearly not the case. These are folks that are coming out for the centrist former Republican mayor of New York, who's running for president, who has a far right record on issues like redistribution, on regulating the banks, on war and peace. So in a way, it's helpful in that it's kind of crystallizing what actually is at stake in our politics. But it is a little bit dangerous that Bloomberg's momentum seems to be halted after these debates. But for a while, it was looking like he might run away with it and score really big on Super Tuesday. We still don't know. Maybe he'll do great next week, but it looks like it's stalled. But for the moment, there's a positive aspect in this, and that we're finally seeing folks for who they really are, whether it's Gregory Meeks or London Breed, or all these new Democrats. People like the co-chair, I believe, of the New Dems or the Blue Dog Pack, Stephanie Murphy. Loves talking about her identity. She's a Vietnamese American. Talks about her refugee past, but sides with big business all the time. Endorse the strike on Soleimani. And she's one of the first people that comes out and endorses Bloomberg, and it's like, oh, of course.
Yeah, I mean, the first in the pack were the absolute worst, because people like Stacey Abrams have too much social and political capital to not risk it all on the first round. Like, they're not gonna dive in front of the bullets immediately at the heat of stop and frisk being resurfaced. Like, his attitude about stop and frisk, which is really terrifying. But the people that came out excited to defend him in the first round of attacks, it's just absolutely, is absolutely sickening.
Look, think of this something like 4 or 5 million mostly young, most like 90% African American and Latino men, stopped and frisked for no reason at all, just walking down the street, thrown up against the wall, completely humiliated, their rights violated. I mean, this is the record that Bloomberg has had and defended and promoted for over a decade. And compared the way that a lot of the so-called lefty democratic civil rights community has treated him versus Bernie Sanders, who at worst might have made an impolite phrase when he talked about the democratic establishment, and he had the temerity to not register as a Democrat. He's an independent. And look at how the two men are treated.
With the Democrats, which is also significant because Michael Bloomberg has ran in opposition to Democrats, and he has funded legislation, or legislators rather, that have stood in opposition to the Democratic Party, whereas Bernie Sanders, for the overwhelming majority of his career, has caucused with the Democrats. So,
I mean, Bernie, even though he's like an independent voice, a critic of the Democratic establishment, if you actually look at his legislative record, he's a team player. He doesn't go out to the lobbyist fundraisers and help them raise money from Lockheed Martin. He doesn't do that, but he caucuses with them. He helps them pass legislation. He's been a team player for the last 30 years, but they still hate his guts.
Yeah. Well, it almost feels like there is some underlying material interest that the Democratic establishment has with those same corporate interests that Bernie Sanders speaks out against. That's finally becoming more and more mainstream, especially in this round, in this election. So you're no stranger to controversial takes yourself. So I'm going to ask you something. I know that you would say that you're not controversial when delivering some of those takes, but I have said that Michael Bloomberg presents a far greater threat to American democracy, even though it's a laughable concept in and of itself. But I genuinely believe that Michael Bloomberg presents a far greater threat to American democracy and the rest of the planet, and the safety of the rest of the planet, than Donald Trump. I don't know if you agree with this on it, and I know that Noam Chomsky does not agree with me on this take, but I legitimately believe this, and I wanted to hear your opinion on it, and we can talk about it a little bit further.
It's just hard to say, because from where I stand, from what I understand, I've spent the last 2 months reading all the articles I can about Bloomberg's history. I've just got a few Bloomberg books I've been reading, trying to understand him better as I'm reporting on him. I've been writing a lot of articles about his policy and political past, and I've covered the Trump administration, and I disagree. I think Trump is a much bigger threat in terms of his willingness and kind of disposition that is very friendly to the far right, to big business interests, his willingness to crush civil liberties and his enemies, and having control over the military. It's a scary thing. Bloomberg is, I don't know how to compare him. Maybe best is to like the leader of Singapore. He wants to turn America into one big safe mall. He does believe in public health. He doesn't believe. He doesn't have very strong support for civil liberties. He has kind of a slight authoritarian bent. If you've ever been to Singapore, I think that's Bloomberg's ideal vision for the world, where you don't have many free speech rights.
Yeah, but they'll chop your hand off for smoking weed.
Not respected, but you are safe. There's low crime. They do have very advanced planning. If you look at how Manhattan is set up, it's kind of a big mall now. It is safe. There is lots of business there. That's a Bloomberg accomplishment. He has taken on the coal industry. He has taken on the gun industry. He just doesn't really care about our feudal levels of inequality. He kind of likes that. Those are his friends.
Oh, he does. He does like that.
Right. So I just want to be kind of fair to Bloomberg here. I mean, he's Trump. I think if given the right moment, if we were in a recession, if we do have a 9/11 style moment, Trump could become very dark. And so could Bloomberg, but not to the same degree.
Okay, so here's why I disagree with that, and I think once I elaborate on my opinion, you'll maybe come to terms with that as well. I believe that I believe that Trump and Bloomberg are very similar. They represent the same interests, obviously the interests of corporations and the wealthy, as Trump has done, like a regular Republican would. And I think that on the side of policy, Bloomberg has some some aesthetic differences, or maybe some significant differences in regards to like gun control specifically, and also maybe some environmental protections potentially, depending on I guess how influential his other billionaire friends could be on him, and the way that he will legislate if let's say he is president, or push the Democratic Party. But the significant threat here is that Bloomberg is not running as a Republican. If Michael Bloomberg was running as a Republican over against Donald Trump, then I would say Michael Bloomberg is less of a threat as a Republican than Donald Trump is. I absolutely agree with that. I mean, he would lose, but I would agree with that. But Michael Bloomberg is running to control the Democratic Party, and Michael Bloomberg already has control over the Democratic Party. So in many ways, that authoritarian side of Michael Bloomberg is going to lead to much worse conditions for America in general if he became the president, because he is actually a competent Trump. And then now we don't even have the semblance of a controlled opposition. We don't even have like an aesthetic controlled opposition against the Republican Party. Now we all of a sudden have Michael Bloomberg and all the money in the world and all the influence and all the willingness of Democrats that have shown that they're interested in fighting for him. Just both parties completely operating as a single party in unity. And I think that would have far greater consequences on American democracy and the rest of the world than at least like people realizing that like the Democratic Party is fighting against the Republican Party and hating Donald Trump, for example. You know what I mean?
No, I respect that position, and it's hard to kind of forecast exactly what's going to happen, but I can see what you're saying. I guess the 2 points that I would raise are that there are some very significant policy differences. Like, Bloomberg is sincerely concerned with public health. You might not agree with,
True.
the soda ban or soda tax or whatever, but it is true that the junk food lobby has a grip on our food system, on our FDA, on our USDA, and no one's really taken them on. It's crazy how many people die of heart disease, of treatable diseases just because of our bad health standards, because the junk food companies pump us up with propaganda. They demand all these huge subsidies, and they have overreaching control in our political system. And Bloomberg has shown a genuine commitment to taking them on, even if you disagree with him. Against coal, he's very clearly spent a lot of money to shut down coal plants, and coal's very bad. But the other dangers that you bring up I think are genuine. But I guess maybe the flip side, the contrarian look at what you're saying, is that he could take over the Democratic Party. Then we really have no meaningful political choices if one party is the far right and the left party in this country is controlled by another Republican billionaire.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That is a sincere fear, but maybe the contrarian look at this is that maybe that does actually end the two-party system, because we're very unusual in the industrialized Western world in that we have a first past the post system, meaning we're single member plurality. That's what they would say as political scientists, but basically meaning whoever gets the most votes in each election, or the most electoral college votes, becomes the leader. That's not how they do it in a lot of countries. In Denmark, in the Netherlands, in Portugal, they have multi-member democracies. And even in the U.S., in our colonial times, we had multi-member voting. Even in New York City, they broke the Tammany Hall machine. LaGuardia in the 1930s instituted reforms that gave the New York City Council proportional voting, so that's where we had kind of a renaissance of socialist parties in America. Same thing with Minneapolis. It was only with the Cold War that we returned to this two-party system in our municipal elections, and it never caught on in congressional elections. So I'm hopeful, and this is my contrarian take, I guess, is that if we did have Bloomberg as president, we would finally reconsider going back and adopting some kind of multi-party system where we had real meaningful political choice, because I think voters would be just so disgusted by the fact that we'd have a Republican Party and a former Republican Party as our two options.
Or the majority of people that don't vote, or the plurality of people that don't vote would turn into an overwhelming majority of people that don't vote versus people that do, and there would be a smaller and smaller number of people that actually participate in the democratic process. Most of them, white PMCs on the liberal side, or whatever the liberal side would be at that point, and like just, I guess, Republican people who care about the racial agitation that the Republican Party does on the Republican side, and
Well,
also
look, I
other
mean,
business
you live
owners.
in LA, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I live in San Francisco. We already have a one-party state effectively in both places, right? You don't have a lot of meaningful choice. It's a tiny cabal of people who actually pick the candidates, and you don't get a lot of options. Thank God we have the referendum system to sometimes bring through a big radical change, or a tax increase, or municipal bond. But at the end of the day, you don't have many choices. If you're in rural America, it's the opposite. You can only pick Republican candidates. I mean, we talk about the two-party system. In a lot of America, we effectively have a one-party state.
Yeah.
And I think people are disgusted by that. We're reaching a boiling point. That's why any politician that promises to smash the establishment, whether it's Trump or Bernie, really catches a special fire, because the corporate media doesn't articulate this. We don't really have a serious discussion, but we have a structural problem in our voting. We have a structural problem in our system, and I think maybe that would be the one benefit of Bloomberg, that he would kind of clarify this for folks, that hey, we don't have meaningful choice. We don't have a really competitive system.
He's the true black pill candidate, is what you're saying. He's the true doomer candidate that will finally accelerate the decline of American democracy and destroy all notion that Americans would have that there is a fair and free electoral process here. And finally, finally we'll be able to maybe make different choices about how we elect our leaders. But I don't know.
That statement, the doomer candidate, you should record that as a Bloomberg ad. I think that could be the alternative take.
Yeah. That's what I'm terrified of course. I always obviously, like, we have the opportunity to personally elect someone that represents hope and change genuinely, so that's good. That's why I advocate for Bernie as much as I can. But yeah, that's my fear about Michael Bloomberg in general, is that he would completely seize control of the Democratic Party, as he is currently doing, and that presents a greater threat to the American future, unless there is some sort of flip side there.
No, I hear you.
Yeah. So you've, I don't know how much longer do you have more time? I want to ask you.
Yeah,
more
I
questions.
could stay for a few more minutes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So you have covered, you're covering the Bloombergs right now, but you've famously covered the Koch brothers a lot. You've harassed them even, and I mean that in a good way. I don't mean that in a bad way.
I've respectfully interviewed them and gone to their conferences.
Yes, exactly. You have respectfully interviewed them at their conferences, and you're one of the few people that has been able to do that and offer like adversarial journalism that was successful. So what do you think about their Jane Myers covered this obviously in her book. What do you think about their operation, their dark money operation, in comparison to Michael Bloomberg's?
Well, in a lot of ways, they set the stage for Bloomberg. We had never seen the level of spending for any political network until 2009. It was kind of a radicalizing moment. For most of America, they were applauding and voting for hope and change in 2008, and they voted in a very big, relatively progressive Democratic majority in Congress. But that also sparked kind of a counter revolution in the boardroom, where a large number of business owners were organized by the Koch brothers. That's why it's not just them; it's this Koch network. It's a group of business CEOs of mostly privately held companies. These aren't mostly publicly traded companies; mostly privately held companies, coal, hedge fund managers, that type of thing. And they concocted this effort to pour hundreds of millions of dollars into the political system to change public opinion, to get people, if you look back at the public opinion polls in 2007, 2008, vast majority of people supported action on climate change. A lot of folks don't remember this, but when John McCain was running against Obama, his policy guru, Doug Holtz-Eakin, argued that his climate plan was more bold than Obama's. I mean, that's just the zeitgeist at the time. Everyone wanted action on climate change.
Yeah, cap and trade. Like John McCain also ran on that, and then reversed his position, of course, and said,
"Yeah, I mean, he sold out all his principles later, but he was just pandering to the public opinion at the time. People wanted action, and so what the Koch brothers did is that they funded this vast network of pundits on television, on think tanks in DC publishing reports, on grassroots groups who would go around the country holding events in every single congressional district, pretty much every single congressional district in the country, and recruiting a whole network of candidates. And that kind of created the conditions to get Republicans to flip and say they don't believe in climate change anymore.
Oh, yeah.
And to usher in this gigantic political wave, the biggest political wave in American history, by most standards, was in 2010, the Tea Party wave. Hundreds of Democrats taken out on the state level, something like 60 or 50 Democrats taken out in Congress. And this changed the political paradigm because they told these lawmakers, hey, you need to fight the Obama agenda no matter what. Even the Affordable Care Act, which was designed on this kind of Heritage Foundation pro-private sector plan that basically preserves our system and then just slightly expands coverage and gets rid of some of the more egregious abuses in the insurance market, but essentially preserves what we have. They said even that you have to fight. You have to continually push to repeal this law over and over again. So they kind of introduced this kind of Mitch McConnell Tea Party style obstruction at all cost, all funded by a small group of billionaires that I think poisoned our politics under Obama. The filibuster had never really been used the way it's now routinely used. Created this kind of hyperpolarization that led to Trump. I mean, Trump literally, when he was kind of testing the waters to run for president, he first started appearing at Americans for Prosperity events. Americans for Prosperity is the grassroots political group created by the Koch brothers that, in the 2016 election had something like 600 staffers. That's about equivalent to the size of the Trump campaign or the RNC. This is a shadow political party created by the Kochs. So they kind of created the atmosphere where Trump could appear at these grassroots Tea Party events and question Obama's birth certificate. And that was helpful to them because they wanted to stop Obama at any cost. And that's what gave us Trump. And that's also what gave us Bloomberg, because now there are, I think, a lot of billionaires in this country that look at what the Kochs have done and say, hey, if they could basically buy public opinion, they could buy dozens and dozens of congressional seats, they could basically buy their own legislative priorities. I'm even wealthier, or I'm about at the same wealth
they're
level.
Not wealthy,
I could do that too.
Yeah. Absolutely. And obviously the other part of that is they spent their money wisely, I would say. I think they flood the market, obviously. They buy the think tanks, they buy pundits, but they were able to also pinpoint, in my opinion, very accurately, like cultural issues that they were able to hammer on, birtherism being one of them, like the most acceptably racist way that you could attack Barack Obama without like literally being like, he's black, he's not a real American, which is precisely what they did. And I think that unfortunately we don't have that on the liberal side, or I guess maybe fortunately, I don't know, but we definitely don't have that. I mean, no like leftist organization that could ever be similar to that exists because of the way that capital accumulates under our current economic organization. But liberals and liberal think tanks don't even do this effectively, in my opinion, because they don't do a good enough job educating the public on issues that the public would care about, because they're also fighting, in my opinion, an uphill battle or a conflicting battle, because on the legislative side, they are also trying to enact the agenda that benefits corporations and the wealthy, whereas their base of voters, the way that they're selling why you should vote for a Democrat to their base of voters is, well, we're going to expand civil liberties and we're going to help you. We're going to help the American working class. And that is conflicting. And Republicans, I think, do a better job of like selling racial agitation and gun legislation that will protect the single issue gun voters. You know what I mean? Things like that, much better than the liberals do, because of both intersectionality and also because of the pervasive influence that white supremacy has had in building America, like as a nation.
Well, look, I mean, I agree with a lot of that, but I think what liberal donors tend to do, what corporations do, is that if you're GE or Lockheed Martin and you're operating in a culturally conservative area, you fund culturally conservative initiatives to ingratiate yourself with the local community and the local legislators. If you're the same corporation and you're trying to operate in the Bay Area, You then fund the Pride Parade. You say that you oppose whatever. You fund the gun stuff. You engage in the liberal kind of social values. But at the end of the day, your economic priorities don't change. You're fighting for subsidies. You're fighting for specialized tax cuts.
Yeah.
You're making sure that the legislators continue to pass economic policies that benefit your bottom line. And so I think we have a very polarized country in terms of our cultural values, but at the end of the day, you have a small group of powerful corporations and donors that deploy culture and identity in ways that keeps us hating each other, even though, I think we all have basically the same material concerns. We all need a home. We all need healthcare. We all need to retire with dignity. We all need a good paying job. And I think all these, these cultural issues cloud that. And I think the Koch brothers, I think in some ways they're sincerely libertarians. But then at the same time, they were able to do this. They funded anti-abortion groups. They pumped millions of dollars into a group called Concerned Women for America that organized these really restrictive laws on abortion. The forced ultrasound. You remember that? But at the end of the day, the Koch brothers don't care about abortion. That's not their actual agenda. It's just that they know that in the Midwest and the South, this kind of politics sells. It helps elect their kind of favored legislator that will continue fighting, for issues that they care about on climate change, on taxes and regulations.
Yeah, it's a wedge issue that they can launch their actual more nefarious agenda off of. And in many cases, I don't even. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I'm not, but I don't personally believe that any sort of significant rollback of like abortion rights is going to happen in this country in the near future, considering the overwhelming majority of Americans that don't want that to happen. So I don't think that we have like a democratic process or whatever, but I don't think that the people in positions of power that are funding these operations also want that to happen either. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's
sure.
what I
Look, a
rely
lot
on.
of the Republicans who are the staffers, who are the operatives, who worked on the big anti-gay campaigns of the Bush era. Even Ken Mellman, Bush's former campaign manager, is gay himself. Like, they were doing this cynically. They realized that this is a way to whip up votes and to get Americans angry at each other and polarized. But personally, they don't care. And they know that a lot of these actual laws aren't going to probably change. Some of them will, but mostly they won't. It's kind of a wash.
Yeah.
So it's cynical.
No, we definitely agree on that. I think it's really terrible, and the most effective way of fighting back against it has not been whatever the Democratic Party has been doing, which is just like finger wagging for the most part. And if I personally believe if you genuinely want to build an intersectional movement, you have to base that on the material conditions and the material interests that every American has, which is what you and I were discussing before. A shelter over your head, a roof over your head, dinner on your table, and less economic anxiety, and a well-paying job that is offering you dignified work, basically. So, and there is a candidate that's doing that, luckily, and his name is Bernie Sanders, or at least he's trying to, which makes sense as to why both parties and both sides and every other legitimate institution is attacking him aggressively. But anyway, I don't want to take up more of your time. I mean, I would love to keep talking to you. You're awesome.
Yeah, well, we should do this again. This was a lot of fun. I'm always happy to come on. This is great, and yeah, keep doing what you're doing, Hasan.
All right. Well, thank you, Lee. Also, shout your Twitter out, and are you working on anything right now? Where can people find you? They're already spamming your links on the Intercept and your Twitter, but.
Oh, sweet. Okay. Well, thanks to your viewers. I'm at LHFANG on Twitter. That's pretty much the only social media I use, and I'm covering the presidential campaign. Bloomberg, in particular, right now, I've got a few stories coming out. I'm writing about some of the congressional battles. There's this. I hate this framing, but people say that she's the next AOC. Jessica Cisneros is running in South Texas in the Laredo area against Henry Cuellar. He's one of the most right-wing, pro-business Democrats in
Nancy
Congress.
Pelosi just endorsed him over her, right?
That's right. Not only that, we were talking about the Koch brothers. The Koch brothers super PAC has never gotten involved to help a Democrat. They just over the last 2 weeks, they've been pouring money into the South Texas district to keep this Democrat Cuellar in office, to beat Cisneros. So that's a very, very interesting race. We published a story today looking at, we've got all of these emails from a surveillance contractor firm and their lobbyists, basically showing that Cuellar was asked to give favors for this contractor that was giving him campaign contributions. So it really kind of just, the story shows the transactional nature of Congress and why the business community loves this particular Democrat who's got one of the most pro-Trump voting records of any Democrat in Congress. So that's why the big business community, the Koch brothers, are inserting themselves into this race to stop a progressive challenger. So we're going to be doing more stories like that. And I write about everything under the sun. If any of your viewers have any tips, I'm always open to it. We've been covering pesticide issues, surveillance issues, big tech issues. So love to hear from folks.
All right. Well, once again, thank you so much for coming on. It's Lee Fang of The Intercept. And you can find his writing in both of the links that they're being spammed by our moderators right now. All right.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you.